Greetings again to all of you gathered with me here at Harvard Divinity School, and those of you joining us via the live webcast at this event as well. I hope that the wonders of technology allow you to feel the excitement and the spirit in this room. Whether you're watching from home or at a local coffee shop, a park, or on your smartphone, or maybe even at your office, we welcome you. I am Sarah Taylor Peck, MDiv 07, chairperson of the Alumni Council for this year. It was my honor to present the Gomes Honors to 5 remarkable recipients just a short while ago in Andover Chapel. And now we're going to hear from each of them in a special installment of Divinity Dialogues, Distinguished Alumni Speaker Series hosted by the Council. First, though, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge each of the members of this year's cohort. One of the members of this year's cohort who's not a graduate of HDS, but who has contributed to the school through her groundbreaking research and her mentorship of countless students. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a hearty round of applause for the Victor S. Thomas Professor of Divinity and now Gomes honoree, Professor Layla Ahmed. Divinity Dialogues was created by the Council in 2012 to give our alumni a platform to share their personal and vocational stories with us. As graduates, we know the importance of stories of our life together here at HDS, of our individual stories and how these weave together to make our community story. Today, we will hear from the 2015 cohort of alumni recipients of the Gomes Honors. Each honoree will tell us about their journey, how their HDS education has been a guide along the way, and what it means now to be a Gomes honoree. So, let's begin with Rakesh Rajani, MTS 91.
Thank you again, Sarah, and thank you for coming and celebrating with us. I still am pinching myself. When I was growing up in Mwanza, Tanzania, in primary school, I think I was in 5th grade, is when I first became aware of the concept of human rights. And a lot of it came from reading the writings of our president, Julius Nyerere. But it always struck me that there was a real contradiction between that stirring rhetoric and how life was lived. And the way in which I experienced it most is, I was, after all, a kid in 5th grade, was that the school just down the road from where I was, I would see kids being beaten up all the time. And so I started to speak with some there and said, look, this is a human rights violation. You know, it felt like somehow we had language to do this about beating. And one of my first lessons from some kids there was actually the beating is not nice, but that's not the real problem. That, you know, you get beaten, it hurts for a while, but you move on. The thing that's really terrible, and I'm trying to paraphrase, I don't remember the exact word, but if you know, he said something like, if you really care about human rights, what you should look at is how we are treated when we screw up. The lesson I learned from there is that the true test of human rights is how you are treated when you screw up or are perceived to make a mistake or are wrong, and whether people make you feel further embarrassed and humiliate you because of your actions or not. And I think that lesson that this kid, his name was Ipani, who taught me in 5th grade, I don't think I understood quite the import of that at that time, but over the years I think I've come to understand how important that is. So if human rights is about how we treat each other or how we treat those who do embarrassing things or who do wrong, let me tell you 3 stories of how I was treated when I did something stupid or embarrassing or plain wrong. The first story is from Brandeis, and I'm very glad that Linda and Steve are here. And I won't mention this person's name, but I'm sure Linda will know who I'm talking about. So this is in my first semester. I've been there about 2 months. The international students there we kind of hang out together some. And it was a Saturday night, and in my dorm, East Quad, this Italian friend was a student there, gives me a call at something like midnight. He says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're awake. I must speak with you right now. Can you come?" So I go over to talk to him in his room. And he says, "Rakesh, I am having the worst crisis I've ever had in my life." And I say, "Yeah." He says, "I love my father. My father has meant a huge amount to me. But right now, I just don't know what to do because I've told him that I'm gay, and he simply cannot accept that. And I just don't know what to do." And he called me to talk with a friend to talk about this with. And I turned around and I said to him, "Well, you know what? Your father is right. I mean, how can you be gay? It's against the law of nature. It doesn't make sense. Maybe you need some counseling." And in that moment, this friend of mine had to turn around and gently suggest to me what I could read, perhaps, and I may want to think about this, but he did it ever so gently, and I thanked him and I went on my way. And over the next few months and really a year, he and a group of our friends slowly took time to get me to read books, to tell me stories, to read poetry, to go to a play, and slowly get me to understand the contradiction between the values that I professed by and my homophobia. And slowly got me to understand that it was inconsistent, and slowly got me, unfortunately too slowly, to wean myself off and come to understand, come to realize my prejudice and move on. They could have easily preached at me. They could have easily, and I deserved to be dismissed and condemned for my views, but I wasn't. And instead, they reached out to that part of me that they believed in and made a connection and helped me turn around. At Brandeis, my senior thesis was on liberation theology. I was really interested in how forms of poor people's organization, and in particular, how do movements not betray themselves, and how do the leadership of movements not betray themselves? The Communist Project in Europe, for example, if you read the stuff, if you read the Frankfurt School, for example, really powerful analysis, powerful stuff, but you often found that the Communist Project fell on its own weight, often because it lost track along the way. And at the same time, in Latin America, there was these Christian-based communities that seemed to somehow stay the course, that seemed to be faithful to the cause. And that's what I did my senior thesis on. I remember reading Gustavo Gutierrez in one of his most memorable phrases, echoing the letter to the Corinthians, something around, all the great proclamations, all the great good deeds in the world are not worth one act of solidarity with the poor. And I wanted to really understand that more, and that's why I came here to HDS. But these liberation theology types were also into poetry and literature, which is what I majored in, and philosophy. And we read poems, and particularly there was a Salvadoran poet, Roque Dalton, that I'm sure some of you have read. And this is somewhat a cliche, but a powerful poem of his called Como Tu, Like Us. It's a great poem, short if you haven't read, but there's a phrase in there that says, poetry like bread is for everyone. And I took that somewhat too literally, I think. And when I was at HDS, I wasn't a particularly diligent student. I don't think any of my professors remember me from my time here because, if there was a protest, it always trumped a class. And I was very good at justifying not doing the papers on time and doing the deadlines because I was organizing for the cause. And part of what that was I was living and working at a Catholic worker in the South End, now gentrified, with my friend Drew, who's somewhere here. And we were working at it's a place called Haley House. It's a Catholic worker soup kitchen. And we were living and working there. at the same time as which we were students, and I was a student here. And during this organizing that we would be doing on issues of homelessness, those were the first Bush years, there was the Gulf War, there was all sorts of shenanigans going on in Central America. The US foreign policy was doing awful things, shoring up dictatorships. And we would organize, including often with HDS students. And you know, we were sure of our analysis and had a difficult time understanding how people would support the war or how people would not, in a sense, think like us. And there was, I think at that time we didn't quite realize, but there was a certain self-righteousness about our organizing. And I remember this particular moment when we were, it might have even been in this, I know it wasn't this room, but somewhere here we were having a meeting, and we got off on a roll about those people who just don't get it. And you know, each one would try to say something more egregious about those other folks who didn't get it than the other. Until one very quiet person, who was one of our, who had been quiet, she said, in a very firm and clearly angry but quiet voice, you know, has anyone here just stopped for a second to ask one of those other people why they believe what they believe or why they act in the way they do? Has anybody even just taken 1 minute to do that? And somehow, and she said it much more eloquently than I just did, but it pierced the room, and it made us realize that the problem was really us in many ways, and that it was our strident self-righteousness that was failing to connect with people's motivations. There's a Charlie Brown cartoon, which is one of my favorite cartoons. Charlie Brown is going by, Snoopy's on the kennel, typing, and says, "Oh, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm writing a book on theology." He says, "Ah, what's the title?" And says, "I have a great title. Have you ever thought that you could be wrong?" And I think that's a lesson that I forget too often, but that's the second lesson I learned after embarrassing myself with my self-righteousness. Let me tell you my third and final story. We're working at Haley House, working with homeless folks, largely young black men who had grown up, many had grown up in the projects, in their 20s. It was hard work. We would cram quarters trying to make do with little means. The Reagan era cuts had cut a lot of not only affordable housing and so forth, Section 8 vouchers, etc., but also had reduced support for organizations like ours. And it was hard work, and these guys that we were serving were often not so appreciative of what we were doing. And there was, they would not stand in queue, and they would sometimes not, just wouldn't behave themselves. And I remember at one point I kind of had enough, and I said to this guy, Roy, I said to him, what do you think you're doing? Here we are busting our ass, waking up, trying to do this, cook this thing for you, and I'm not doing it, you're not doing me any favors, I'm doing this for you, and you should be appreciative, something of that sort. And again, I was in a bit of a fluster, and he just looked at me quietly. He was about 3 times bigger than me, and he just kind of, without saying a word, took my arm and took me out. And kind of we went round, there's a car park around the corner, and he kind of sat me down on the hood of a car, and he started off with some language which I think I should not repeat in these halls. But in short, he got me to realize that he didn't need my patronizing him, and that I wasn't doing anything for him, I was doing stuff for myself. And he got me also to see in certain ways my own latent racism. He got me to understand the importance of dignity and respect regardless of one's circumstances. In each one of these 3 stories, I think I deserved to be dismissed, to be treated, to be seen as in part, the bigot that I was, or the patronizing, pompous, person that I was. But each one of these folks didn't do that. The easier route out for them would have been just to either ignore me or to say something nasty and move on. But they didn't, and each one took the time to sit me down and teach me something important. So I'm enormously grateful for having been at Brandeis and being here at Harvard Divinity School and having engaged with people and the communities that I came across here, and for them making the choice that they made instead of walking away from me. And now, as my 13-year-old son would always tell me, hope you get your act together about these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rakesh. We'll next hear from Shaun Casey, MDiv 83, MPA 89, THD 98.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I want to express my deepest thanks to you and to the Alumni Council. From that list, you can see I had a hard time leaving this place. I kept coming back for more degrees. My parents once said, I grew up in this large Irish-American family with 5 children, and I'm the next to last. And the first grandchild came from my marriage. And our parents used to say, our children don't give us grandchildren, they just give us more graduate degrees. And, Wendell Berry, the poet, essayist, and self-proclaimed mad farmer, once wrote that we live the life given, not the life planned. And at the ripe old age of 22, when I arrived on the shores of Cambridge, Massachusetts, I would have hotly contested that thesis because I had a plan. Now, a couple of years older than that, I see its wisdom, that indeed we live the life that's given to us. And I certainly have not lived the life that I had hatched and planned at the age of 22. So I'm acutely aware today of how much I have been given, and I am deeply grateful for what this has dealt me. And I want to parse that gratitude for a couple of minutes this afternoon. First of all, my gratitude to this institution is deep and multi-layered. This very room has been a space of great joy and great perplexity to me. Ann and I actually had our wedding reception in this room. And the driving attraction was it was free. But it's actually a great space to do that. But I see Margaret Miles' portrait here. And Margaret, I think, was probably in her second year as a professor here when I first arrived. And I took her history of Christian thought and was just absolutely mesmerized. And yet I recall a brown bag or an evening discussion here where she said the single sentence that made me the angriest I ever was at this school. And I've not told Margaret this, so please don't repeat it. Someday I hope to tell her face to face. But it was on a panel, should you do a doctorate in religion? And the place was packed with master's students because in our heart of hearts we all wanted to do that thing. We wanted to hang around and do the PhD. And I was so excited and so energized. And Margaret said, if you can possibly do anything else, trust me, do that thing. And I was furious at her because she had burst this bubble, this dream, this life I had planned. And I remember I was agitated for days because I deeply respected her. And I thought she had failed me. Now, it turns out I did take a detour and my checkered career began. And eventually I found myself in a spot years later where indeed the only thing I could do was that doctoral program. But it was at the age of 28 instead of the age of 23. And I was in the wilderness for 5 years or so, thanks to Margaret. And I'm actually grateful to her that I did that. But at the time, it was extremely hard to hear because that dream died hard in my own life. There are many portraits here of folks, and so this is sort of a joyful, haunted room for me, and I always love coming back here. And so I'm honored to be in your company. I'm honored to be in this company as well. I'm grateful for Peter Gomes. Peter was my first academic advisor when I arrived here at 22. And as someone who was born in the late middle of the 20th century in the South, I'm astonished when I say this. I remember when my public schools were desegregated in 4th grade. I tell that to my children and they think, what planet did you grow up on? They literally cannot believe that one of their parents is old enough to have been able to tell that story. So when I came and met Peter Gomes, I had no conceptual framework to understand who he was and where he had come from. And he blew up all the stereotypes I had, in fact. I knew he had the accent. He was from Plymouth. He had worked in Tuskegee. And so I sort of thought I knew what that was. And he blew my mind and blew all those stereotypes away. And I guess perhaps the greatest lesson I think I took from Peter was Peter spoke his mind. There was never any doubt where he stood at the end of the... Now, sometimes that irritated people. Sometimes that didn't always endear him to folk. But his courage, his tenacity was a deep inspiration to me from the very first day that I met him. So I'm deeply honored to receive this honor in his name. HGS also taught me so much about interpreting the political implications of religious belief and practice. If there's one thread that runs through my sort of bizarre pilgrimages, I've always been mesmerized, intrigued by the political implications of religious belief and practice. I get now to travel the world and talk to people about how their faith, their community, then interacts in public life and in political life. And if you have the ears to listen, there are remarkable stories being told around this planet today. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be paid to go and meet these people and listen to them and try to humbly respond and say, thank you for making the United States government smarter in our diplomacy because you're willing to take the time to tell those stories. And the stories are absolutely mesmerizing. And so here I am at the end of this given, not planned life, enjoying really spending time assessing the religious dynamics, the dynamics politically of lived religion. I think back, too, when I look at some of these portraits, I saw Ralph Potter, I saw Preston Williams in the audience. I think back to the influence they had on me. I studied with people like Brian Hare, Francis Fiorenza, Harvey Cox, the late Ron Thiemann, and it's opened so many doors for me. And I think that's the greatest gift HDS gives to students, is that you are prepared when you leave this place to keep thinking, to keep studying, and to keep reflecting, and you are ready to enter into the real world, if you will, after you've left this particular academy. And I can't help but be grateful because of the teachers that I had here. I remember in the fall of my freshman year, it wasn't Brandeis, it was this crazy place in Abilene, Texas, Abilene Christian University, and I remember somebody pointing out a faculty member who had graduated from Harvard Divinity School, and he had studied religion. And there's like a rip in the space-time continuum in my brain, because where I grew up, I didn't know you could, I knew Harvard existed, of course, but I didn't know there was a place, Harvard Divinity School, where you could study this. And I said, I want to follow that man. I want to find out what that was like for him. And then 4 years later, I found myself moving here and following in his footsteps. That person, over the arc of his academic career, sent almost 40 people to Harvard Divinity School. So he changed a generation of thinkers in my denomination simply because he came here in the 1940s and then went back and kept us coming on pilgrimages for a long time afterwards. I'm also grateful today to Secretary of State John Kerry for giving me the chance to join the State Department and design and launch this Office of Religion and Global Affairs. I was on a panel last night in New York City and said, you know, as a professor, you're not really held accountable things you say out loud, right? Reporters call me, I say crazy things, and my president of my seminary says, as long as they spell the name of the school right, I don't care what you say. Now, I'm in the State Department where there are 5,000 people who care what I say, lest I say something really stupid. And so it's a great cultural paradigm shift to go from being the academic who can pop off or throw verbal bombs at people. And now, actually, people are kind of throwing some of those things at me, which is kind of an interesting reversal. But John Kerry believes that religion is a very powerful force around the world. He believes that we have paid a high price diplomatically in the past because we have not taken religion seriously. We've ignored it at our peril, and we don't have to go very far back in our history to name that peril. But it's very sobering to walk into that large bureaucracy, and they basically give you a blank piece of paper, a box of crayons, and say, draw your own picture and then build it. The largest thing I've organized previously to this was a 12-person graduate seminar. So now I have to build an office that engages the globe on religion. And even though I've got 25 brilliant staffers, when you look at 25 staffers versus 7 billion people, the majority of whom have some form of religious commitment or affiliation, the numbers are absolutely overwhelming when I think about it very deeply. And yet, to have this chance to try and translate my boss's belief that religion is powerful and we need to understand it, I'm the guy who has to build the office to try to fulfill that mandate. And it's a great challenge. And it's one I wake up every morning thankful that indeed I've had the opportunity to try and make it happen. My wife often says when I come home at the end of the day, wipe that stupid grin off your face. You're having way too much fun in your workplace. And that's a great problem to have in your own domestic arena. But I wake up every morning and I go to work with 4,000 or 5,000 people in my building, filled full of colleagues who are committed to eliminating extreme poverty, promoting human rights globally, and seeking to prevent conflict, to mitigate conflict, and build peace. And that's not a bad job to have. So thank you. I give my deepest thanks to the HDS Alumni Association, to Dean Hempton, what you're doing at the school here. I'm honored to tell people around the world I'm a graduate of this school. And thank you again for this honor and award.
Thank you so much, Shaun. We'll now hear from Janet Cooper Nelson, MDiv 80.
When this opportunity to speak came as part of this award, I thought, I don't know if this is the icing on the cupcake or this is the cupcake. Sitting in this room for the first time in the fall of 1977, I was in a place I never imagined being, with people I had no idea about why they had come, and I was really hoping they didn't ask me why I was there either. I didn't have a plan for where my life was carrying me. I was on leave from a public school teaching job where teaching global history, a little bit of American history, a little bit of economics, and basically worrying about the problems of labor relations for teachers seemed to me to be the foreground. I walked into a place that our class had 28 people in the Master of Divinity program, so as Dean Hempton looks out over all he must do now, we were a much smaller school. Two of the people sitting in these portraits, Jerry's already pointed them out to you, Margaret Miles and Connie Buchanan, were here or soon to arrive. Connie's office was downstairs in the basement, and there was a lot of mold on the wall, and nobody was really too sure what was going to happen with a group of people that were pretty intoxicatingly exciting to those of us women in the class. We were 50% of the class. Many of that 50% were Roman Catholic, and I'm looking at one of my classmates from my orientation to ministry group who's sitting back there, who told me that her order of nuns had actually put together shekels so that she could come here because they endorsed her idea for ordination even though they couldn't quite yet see it. I was stunned by the holy errands that people had come on, and I kept thinking I should say something much more grand about my own. But the one thing I could say was that nowhere I'd yet been, as a matter of sacred practice, had quite fit. And there was a remarkable chaplain in my life, a college chaplain, whom I met after I graduated. I don't know if that still happens in universities, although I think it does. Paul Santmeyer, who's sitting right there in the middle of the room also, who had told me that while God didn't always talk to him, God was telling him that I should go to divinity school, which I thought was nothing short of remarkable. One, I was surprised that my name was coming up in God's conversation at all. And I was kind of running hard away from a small sectarian community I'd been raised in, not for lack of love of those people. They remain my family, and I will always be grateful to them for my formation. But I knew it didn't work. I wasn't so wise as to know I just put my foot in it, the way Rakesh said. But in my brain, I put my foot in so many things. I just kept hoping to get out of the potholes. I thought when I arrived at college at Wellesley that I would head to medicine. That was definitely not the destination that really had my name on it. And a little bit of time in organic chemistry was absolute confirmation that that was not a good idea. I fell in love with United States Studies, which was what Wellesley humbly called what everybody else in the academy now calls American Studies. We knew it wasn't about Canada or Central America or South America, and we thought people should be precise. I started out in my undergraduate thesis to prove about whether Jonathan Edwards was a Calvinist, and my advisor, an incredible and consummate constitutional historian, eventually convinced me to write about Jonathan Edwards' concept of the wilderness, which is a book I still hope to write. I just need to stop working. I had no idea when I came here to Harvard that people whose portraits would hang on the wall and look enormously distinguished would in fact educate me in the ways of the world about how you claw yourself out of places where people are putting you into places that are meant to be. And the person who said so was God. I didn't know people even spoke about God in animated ways other than people like Paul. He did that every week in chapel services, and I was sort of marveling at that because I thought leaving behind my sectarian context meant leaving behind that kind of talk too. And when I got here, there were people who spoke about God from so many different vantages, and I found it intoxicating. I often said to people that I had no idea that a divinity school was a place where this kind of conversation was going on. Harvard's libraries were remarkable. I couldn't find enough time in my schedule to go there. There were people like Firth and Rawls talking about justice on the main quadrangle, and I sat in those lectures astonished. Larry Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan were duking it out over at the Ed School, and I could see who was winning. But I have to say, it was astonishing to me to just be present for all of that. And it seemed to me that this place was some intersection of some of the most interesting people I knew, who were headed to do everything. And to even just claim to be in their company was lovely. And to find ourselves late and early, I have to tell you that our class was the last MDiv class that was made to go through 3 full days of exams in the middle of our 3rd year to get our degrees. Kathy Brownback, who is not here to defend herself, and yours truly, stood on the tables in Rockefeller Library throwing paper airplanes out over our absolutely madly studying classmates, trying to break up the tension the night before all this began. It struck us as completely useless to keep studying, and we thought cookies and fun would be a good idea, but several of our friends stomped their feet and said this was serious. The next day, we walked into exams that took place on Monday, and then Wednesday, and then Friday. Blue books got produced in just extraordinary numbers. I can't imagine that anybody actually could read the ones we wrote on Friday because your hand was so sore from writing. We'd been given a 40-page, single-spaced syllabus of the books we should have read by that time. We all knew we hadn't. And some of our classmates headed in with original texts to support that work for 3 days. I still remember Walker Zeiser walking in with a huge thing this big, which was the Bible of baseball statistics, plunking it on the desk. I do honestly think he was the one person in our class that didn't complete that requirement. So that may be a warning to those of you who may still be studying. I say all this to say that earlier this year, as I sat at my mother's bedside as she was dying, we didn't talk so much as her strength ebbed away. She was nearly 97, and she'd had an amazing life. But the very last words she spoke in the world were the words, "Thank you." And she's transformed those words for me in a way that, coming today, I thought, I really know we're given 8 to 10 minutes, but I don't think it takes that long to say thank you. The introduction to the academy as a place that was really not just a crossroads or a set of intersections, but actually a congregation, a very odd congregation, people who practice every tradition and none, and yet for a time have done, as Sharon Parks taught me when I was here, to set their heart on something, and to come with that incredible focus and leave with nothing less on their plate to do. That's a university. It's what's kept me doing what I saw Paul doing, teaching and serving as a chaplain to a university, standing in this crazy place that's partly between the practice and prayer of the university, its disciplinary system, our not very human rights oriented sometimes practices as universities, the things that pry people out of the basement to put them up on the walls eventually. Margaret was the first woman to be granted a full professorship status. I sat in a professorial committee meeting down the road. I think there were about 15 people in that with the dean. The idea was to get rid of the Women's Research Associates program. It really wasn't, so some of those folks said, transforming the faculty. But Krister Stendahl, then the dean, came back with the largest grant the university had ever gotten for the Divinity School from the Ford Foundation, and life moved on. And in fact, what's happened for women and men here of every tradition is just remarkable. So my words are still what I planned from the beginning. To HDS, thank you. To the students that have been a privilege for me to recommend onto this place, they tell me it continues to be the vital and most amazing place that they've encountered. To classmates and friends, I'm looking at Ben Marcus, who will graduate this year, a Brown grad, who heads into this very world that Shaun works in of international relations and peace building, but who sends me this note and says, I've nominated you for this award. I thought, good God. What an extraordinary privilege, but also what an amazing invitation. And I credit HDS with having invited me to this world that I didn't even know existed. And there's nothing else to say, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. We will now hear from Honoree Charles Collier, MTS 73, in a slightly different fashion. I'm pleased to invite Susan Stover to the podium at this time to make a few remarks. After she finishes, if you'll turn your attention to the screen at the other side of the room.
Thank you, Sarah. On behalf of Charlie, thank you to the HDS Alumni Council for this wonderful tribute. Charlie is deeply honored and touched by your recognition. I would also like to thank Hannah Peters, Michael Getz, and Paul Massari for all their efforts over the past months in making this day such a memorable occasion. What you are about to see was part of their efforts. This video is excerpted from a video that Charlie's sons, Whit and Ben, had commissioned upon Charlie's retirement from Harvard back in December of 2011. They wanted to capture Charlie's life stories while he could still tell them. In the video, you will see Charlie refer to his Alzheimer's as a gift, and he tells you how it is a gift. One of the gifts has been people openly, eloquently, and frequently sharing with Charlie the impact he has had on their lives. One friend recently wrote Charlie, when learning of the Gomes honor, there are not many people who get to hear or read their own eulogy. So on behalf of Charlie, thank you again for this meaningful gift.
I think he has a kind of pastor's approach to his clients, that he really takes care of people.
People think about Charlie and they think of a trailblazer, they think of somebody who's fearless and a fabulous showman, but I want to add generosity to that word collage, emphatically.
He, by example, has showed, and especially now, just a tremendous fortitude and tremendous positive outlook and attitude that continues to surprise me, and I think it's both inspiring and something that it just makes my life better and everyone around him's lives better.
This is what I think. I hope my career make the world a better place. Number one. Number two, I did my best. And third, I love my family. I was doing the photography round, and we started to have a family. So it came to me that I can't make a living in this and really don't want to. And I was in driving distance for Dartmouth at this point. So I went up to there and asked if they had anything I could do. And so for 1 year I was there, first doing some writing for them and then going to the annual fund. And the minute I got to the annual fund, I said, oh, this is I love it. To help people get organized, to ask people for money, and I can ask them how many too, and wonderful people. And then I went to Andover as a major gift officer for 3 years, and then on to Brown University for 2 years as the second in command of Planned Giving, for 5 years at Princeton and the director of Planned Giving. The Princeton campaign was over 1982, and just by luck there was an opening here at Harvard, and so I've now been today 25 years. I've loved this work because I help people do the right thing, share some of their money to make a difference in the world. Some people say you're a therapist, but I'm not a therapist, although I ask therapeutic questions of my people I work with. And this has been the most important learning of my adulthood. I think about families differently, meaning that family relationships is the epicenter of our challenges. I ask provocative questions as a way to help them in their deepest needs. So I drifted away from the Planned Giving. I still do it, but I'm more fascinated about this work. And I've come to the conclusion that this is my ministry. I think my illness is a gift. It is a gift for 3 reasons. I am retiring early, and I will be able to do some things in consulting, seeing cousins, friends, classmates that I haven't seen in 30 years. I'm starting the last third of my life. I don't have much unfinished business, and I don't have a long bucket list either. If I didn't have Alzheimer's, I would be working. And this is going to be something much greater. Second, I have had the privilege of working with many Harvard alumni in my 25 years of service to a great university. I have been showered with emails, calls, letters, to say how grateful they are for my work. And number 3 is a gift. I'll call it, it's time for soul work. A Unitarian minister has once said, "Life is nothing but a chance to grow a soul." I now think about my life often because I'm trying to get it right. I have changed because of my illness, hopefully for the good. I don't care what people think of me, where they go to college, how much money they make. What really matters is nothing but love.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to all of you again Rakesh Rajani, Shaun Casey, Janet Cooper Nelson, Charles Collier, and Layla Ahmed, the 2015 Peter Gomes Honorees.